This is Making Stitches, and this time Dyer, printmaker and artist Tracy Fox shares her creative story of how her love of working with cloth helped her come to terms with the effects of a life-changing accident.
When I had that accident and I was trying to recover from the consequences of it, which turned out to be quite life-changing, that's where my focus mentally went. I was just constantly thinking about what ideas I had for the next piece of work I was going to hopefully be able to work on. So I suppose it was a distraction, but I would describe it as rehab really. Once I was physically able to start doing things, although on a restricted scale, I went back to my creativity as a refuge, if that makes sense. And then as that developed, the natural progression was starting to sell my art cloth to other textile artists who used it in their work.
Hello and welcome to Making Stitches. I'm Lindsay, a lifelong crafter, an amigurumi crochet designer and journalist. I love to hear people's stories, and in each episode of Making Stitches I share a creative chat or chats I've had with inspiring makers from the worlds of textiles and yarn crafts. This week I'm staying close to home in Manchester. I made a short trip to visit Tracy Fox, a dyer, printmaker and artist based just down the road from me, who's the person behind the brand new Great Northern Textile Show, which is happening later this month. Tracy told me about her own creative journey, why she wanted to host a show like this in Manchester, as well as showing me around her workshops. Here she is now.
I don't remember a time that creativity wasn't around, and I'm using the word creativity in quite a broad sense. So I grew up with lots of strong women around me who, if they wanted something doing, they did it themselves, and it didn't really matter whether that was, laying a carpet or decorating or knocking down walls or whatever. They would get stuck in. And I don't know what it's like to grow up in a household that doesn't have a sewing machine either. So my great grandmother taught my nana, and my nana taught my mum, and then she taught me. So I remember the heritage of going from a treadle to an electric treadle. I'm making myself sound very old now, I know. And then we had an industrial machine because my mum always sewed, but not patchwork and quilting. That came much later. So the short answer is always. I've always had creativity to some degree around me, and I would feel like there's a huge hole if that didn't continue.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people can identify with that. At what point then did it tip over from being a hobby to being your main endeavour?
Right, well, I suppose you can pinpoint that really to 2013, where my previous life, as I'd like to describe it as a clinician in the NHS, ended following an accident, and I'd already been creating with cloth and different techniques, printing using things from my garden, which is now fashionably called eco printing, but there wasn't a name for it then really, and using the rusty metal. I was already experimenting with that. I was already on the path, shall we say, for working with cloth and surface design techniques, and particularly art quilting as well. And then when I had that accident and I was trying to recover from the consequences of it, which turned out to be quite life-changing, that's where my focus mentally went. I was just constantly thinking about what ideas I had for the next piece of work I was going to hopefully be able to work on. So I suppose it was a distraction, but I would describe it as rehab really. Once I was physically able to start doing things, although on a restricted scale, I went back to my creativity as a refuge, if that makes sense. And then as that developed, the natural progression was starting to sell my art cloth to other textile artists who used it in their work, starting to attend events with a stand, which is absolutely nerve-wracking. And I must admit, the learning point from that was I much prefer to be away in my studio, surrounded by my dyes and, cloth and all the rest of it, than stood behind a stand selling to visitors. It took me out of my comfort zone. That did. So that's where it started. Really, that was the tipping point, and it just progressed from there.
And I believe that having visited a particular show for several years and then taking out a stall yourself, you found yourself running it.
I did, yes. In 2014, I had my very first stand selling my artwork at an event in Nantwich that happens every year in January, and it was a long-standing event that I had indeed been going to as a visitor for a number of years. So I had my very first stand there, and then in 2017 the organiser approached me and asked me would I consider taking it over because she was retiring. And it's such a lovely show that it's now the Quilters exhibition and fabric sale in Nantwich, and it's such a social event as well, and it was very much the start of the creative year because it happens sort of the third week of January, something like that. So I didn't want it to end, and I said yes, and it will be in its 20th year coming this January coming. So I've been doing that, apart from the year that we missed with lockdown, I've been doing that for 5 years.
Wow. And what's it like then, going from being a visitor to a stall holder to actually running an event like that?
That's a good question. I've never really considered that before. I suppose it was just a natural progression that I've never stopped to think why or how or I suppose I'm from my clinical background, I'm very used to wearing many hats. So even though I was organising the event in Nantwich, I was still attending other events as an exhibitor. So they all sort of run together, if that makes sense. It wasn't the end of one and the beginning of the next one and the end of that and the beginning of the next. It sort of continued as a progression.
And the reason why our paths crossed was because you have a brand new show.
I do indeed. You'd think I would have
close to my home, that's for sure.
Yes, definitely. Well, having organised the Nantwich event, I had an idea for a long time to do a second event, but this time in Manchester. And there's lots and lots of threads to this sort of idea that I had. One was, we don't really have a show in our neck of the woods in sort of Greater Manchester that celebrates textiles in the way that I wanted to bring different threads, pardon the pun, different threads together from the textile world. We all travel a great distance to go to other big shows, and I certainly do because I'm a bit of a show addict. I do love going to see other people's works and exhibitions, and I wanted the opportunity to offer that opportunity to groups as well as exhibitors who sell to creative like you and I. So there was lots of threads to that, and the idea wouldn't go away. And for a series of reasons, my ability to continue with the being an exhibitor, that wearing that hat has come to an end, following a number of elements that have come together. One, my existing problems, physical health, and then having COVID sort of sealed the deal, shall we say, in terms of the long-term consequences of that. So as one door, I don't know who said that, as one door opens, shuts, another one opens, or whatever the saying is. So as the attending the events came to an end, it sort of provided an opening to bring the idea to life. And that's, in terms of timing, that was the rationale for that. But I wanted to do something that was different to the Nantwich event. I didn't want that to be the Nantwich event, but in Greater Manchester. And I very much wanted to celebrate textiles, which is the name of the show is Great Northern Textile Show, but the strapline is actually celebrating textiles, because that's the idea behind it. And I wanted to bring lots of different art forms together, and I deliberately used the term art forms. Spinning, weaving and dyeing, textile art, knitting, crochet, patchwork and quilting, felting. I mean, there's some magnificent work out there, from a felting perspective, as there is in all the disciplines. And I wanted to be able to give a vehicle to showcase that, but also not in an elitist way, because none of us are born making gallery-worthy art right from the get-go. We all start somewhere, whether it's in childhood, whether we come to it later in life as an adult, we all start somewhere. So, as I say, there's lots of strands to this show, and one of the other ones was giving the opportunities for when visitors arrive, that they feel comfortable and they're not a million miles away from the textile art that's going to be on display, but giving them the opportunity to interact, and that's where the guilds come in, and they will all be interactive. You'll be able to see demonstrations of spinning and weaving and felting and patchwork and quilting and knitting and crochet, and you'll also, those guilds will offer you the opportunity to have a go. So for those people who I've always wanted to have a go and I've never got around to it, that opportunity's there. And also for people who've started but want to progress in a particular direction, hopefully that was something for them too. So there's a number of threads to it really, and that's just a few of them. Lots of objectives and lots of boxes to tick for this show.
Indeed, and of course Manchester itself is built on textiles, isn't it? So it's a very important part of our heritage.
Absolutely it is, and it's one. I mean, I'm not aware of everything that happens across the region, but we don't have a focused event or show that, there might be lots of groups that incorporate it as a theme and they'll put on a local exhibition, but in terms of something that draws the city together or even the region together, because obviously Lancashire and even Merseyside, we have a shared history from a textile point of view in some ways. There isn't a showcase for it in the region, and it's a shame. And I'm not saying that the show, the Great Northern Textile Show, will fill that huge gap, but it might be a toe in the water. And if people come and they be inspired, or they sign up for a workshop, because a lot of our exhibitors, they teach as well as exhibit. If somebody comes to any of those art forms as a consequence of coming to the show, I'll be really chuffed.
That's wonderful. Now, you said that you, as well as being actually geographically in the north, the location, the venue for the event, you've chosen exhibitors who are from the north as well.
Yes, I have, and I suppose that continues to feed into the theme of the our heritage element of it. So the show is curated, so I have gone around and I've looked at the different art forms. I've met the people in advance and personally invited them to exhibit at the show, whether that as a group exhibitor or the main exhibition, or having a stall selling creative kits and supplies, whatever that may be. So yes, we have people as local as Salford, the textile artist who's exhibiting, Leah Higgins, she's got a studio in Eccles in Salford. Who else have I got? I've got somebody coming from Northern Ireland. I've got fabulous creatives coming from the northeast. It's not exclusive to the northwest and further. We have allowed people in from the Midlands as well. But basically, the focus was that, but it is a bit wider than that as well. But yes, I was trying to celebrate not only our heritage but also the local excellence that we have on offer, which often doesn't get to be seen.
No, that's very true. I think often craftspeople are beavering away in their own little bubble, and it isn't. And also, unless you are part of a guild or a group or part of a particular craft community, you can be completely oblivious to the fact that these wonderful things are happening.
Yes, definitely. And I think also, because my experience of the Nantwich show was very much rooted in, it brought people together. People met there that might not see each other that often in the rest of the year, and the atmosphere was very much of positivity and creativity and mixed with the social aspect of it. And in terms of the new show, I'm hoping that it brings people together. It's an opportunity to say, have you heard of this show? Should we go together? So it's not just a case of people coming to, visiting the show in a group, but they might meet other people there that have a shared interest, or they might see a group that they didn't even know existed, or they might join a guild because they didn't even realise that existed. I know when I first discovered patchwork and quilting, I didn't know the Quilters Guild of the British Isles even existed, because it wasn't something that I'd been raised with. It was a completely separate world that I discovered at the Festival of Quilts in 2008, and I've been obsessed since. But hopefully, if people discover things that they didn't know, or it reinforces their love of something, then all of that's good.
So where is it and when is it?
Right. Well, it's in Urmston in Trafford, which is in Greater Manchester, and it's on Sunday the 23rd of October, and it's 10 till 4, and tickets are available online from the website.
Now, as well as speaking to me about the Great Northern Textile Show, Tracy offered to show me around her workshops, or as she likes to call them, rooms of requirement. First of all, we took a look around her dye room.
So this is where I do my wet work, printing, dyeing, but it also has to act as a storage. So as I'm making it, or accumulating it, shall we say, this is where it finds its home. And also, when I'm doing events, exhibiting my work, this is where all the storage, so the stand and the display things need to go. So it has, it really is a room of requirements, because it has to have multiple functions, basically.
Absolutely, but I think anybody who does anything crafty, they never have enough room for all their stuff, do they?
Most definitely not. So this is, I prefer to dye and print outside if I can, and particularly the rust print. So all of this fabric here is made with, it's a contact printing method, basically using rusty metal. So I'll show you in a second I describe it as an unhealthy or a healthy collection of rusty metal, and then it's up to you to decide which one of those that it is when you see it. So this is something that I started with really early days with the print, with the mark making with rusty metal, basically. And what I love about this is a couple of things, really, probably more than that. One is you never get the same print twice, so I can use the same piece of metal, wrap it in exactly the same way, follow the exact same process, and I'll get a different, so like these pieces here, I'll get a different mark made each time. And if I wrap it a different way using the same metal, I can get a different mark. If I use the metal over time, it's degrading because it's rusting, so that changes. So it's not a case of here's a stamp or here's a screen with a perfect image on it and you'll be able to replicate that. It's very much an organic process of, you're not too sure what you're going to get. And I actually, considering my perfectionist control freak tendencies, it's a constant surprise to me that I love you don't entirely know what you're going to get. So the other technique that I use a great deal is shibori. This is an example of shibori. So shibori is an ancient Japanese technique, and I'm very much drawn to techniques that have a history and an artistry to them, and they're passed down from generation to generation. And I suppose that ties in with my own experience of the women in my family teaching the next generation how to knit and sew and dressmaking, etc. So I'm very much drawn to shibori. And the other aspect of it is it's not quick. You have to invest time in, particularly the stitched resist ones. I mean, it can be quick, but I tend to like the investment of time that you put into it. That appeals to me. I also like the fact that shibori artists of old, they weren't considered masters unless they've been doing it for 20-30 years or something ridiculous like that, so that sort of appeals to me as well. And just the many facets of it. I mean, the work that you can see here, the different examples. This is a stitched resist one, so that's the same technique, but just applied differently on the cloth. So I'll do rows and rows and rows of stitching. Pull it really tight, so you've got like a really tight concertina in whatever shape. So obviously this is in a circle format, and this is more linear. And then I'll apply the dye. The concentration of the dye will make a difference, the temperature will make a difference, the colour mixing, how wet or dry the fabric will be. So there's a long list of elements that can affect the outcome of what you get, and you can either just go with the flow or you can try and manipulate them to steer it in a particular direction. But even if you do that, you're still not sure what you're going to get, which again I love. So this is a stitch resist, and with shibori is the umbrella term for not a direct translation, but to wring, squeeze or press. And then each technique, so whether it be a resist technique or using stitch or using blocks, each technique has a name, and then each pattern that you get underneath that technique also has a name. So this is Nui Shibori, which is a stitch resist technique. Some of the other ones are using blocks. So those purple pieces, you see the purple and white squares there. So these are a itajimi technique, where you manipulate the cloth in a certain way, and then you'll apply a shape, and then where the shape, you bound it really tightly, and where the shape hits the fabric, obviously the dye can't get in there, so you're left with that shape as the resist. But what I always do is I like to work with wet cloth, because you can probably see from these pieces, I like what I describe as the bleed. I like the dye to travel.
It's not a harsh barrier between the dye and the
right.
naked fabric.
If I wanted a circle, I could print a circle. If I wanted, a hexagon or whatever it might, or a tree shape, if it was more literal, I can get that by, from other means. But what I like about this is that each piece, you can see I've used this similar circular resist as acrylic shapes basically that I've clamped, but they're three completely different pieces because of the way I've applied the dye, the strength of the dye, how many times I've applied it to a particular place, whether I've applied it in the middle and I'm trying to enhance the bleed, that sort of thing. So I like the experimentation, I suppose, is the summary from that, really.
Yeah, and again, every piece that you do is utterly unique.
It is, and that's a conscious decision in some ways, because I'm not a machine. I can't compete with a commercial fabric house. I don't want to compete with a commercial fabric house. Commercial fabric is brilliant, and it's very good. I can't compete with that. And also, I don't know how to explain this, the working with your hands and producing something that you have put your heart and soul into, that's where my enjoyment lies, not the repetition of the same thing over and over and over. I'd get bored to death with that, to be honest.
Yes.
I really would. Each time, this piece of fabric that you can see here, this is just a scrunch technique, but I've applied 3 or 4 different coloured dyes, and I've let them mix on the cloth. So we now have a transition from blues to purples to reds to oranges to yellows. And the way I've manipulated the cloth, you can see here there's a different textural effect to this piece here, which is more linear. So you can play about with that. And if I wanted to replicate that piece, if somebody said to me, "Oh, I love that, can you make me one?" I wouldn't be able to. It might come close because I could replicate the process, but the outcome would be different.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing.
Do you think so?
Absolutely. And the colours you've got are just stunning. So it kind of, it's like next level tie-dyeing, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm glad you've mentioned that, because a lot of people, they use the description tie-dye in a very derogatory way as well. If I had a penny for every time somebody said to me, "Oh, it's only tie-dye," and that taps into something else that's a big issue that I think we have, is the perception around textiles and it not being art. And oh, anybody can do that, it's only cloth, you know, that sort of idea. And I think it's only when you start working with cloth and exploring the options that you know, the surface design options, and this is even without stitch, you know, printing, you can see here some of these are breakdown printing, which I learned and I've added to my repertoire from following a course with Leah Higgins at her studio in Eccles, and she's the master of breakdown printing. And I also love using my handwriting. I love text in textiles. I absolutely love text in textiles. So this is thickened dye in a bottle, and I've used it like a marker, and then just written over and over. So this is the same word written over and over. And as you can tell from my house, my cloth and my dress wear, blue is definitely my thing. So I like the variety, and you can bring these together in a cohesive way in a piece of work like an art quilt.
Yeah.
So yes. So would you like to see my healthy unhealthy collection of rusty metal?
I'd love to.
Crikey. Walk this way. Just be careful because it's a bit of a maze in here. The other thing where I started from as well was printing from the garden.
Yes.
I started with that around the same time as, I'm going back 12, 13 years, it must be at least 12 years ago now. So, this is my outside workspace, shall we say. Once people know that you collect rusty metal, you'd be surprised, everybody wants to give you their rusty metals, and I can't say no, I'm a bit of an addict. So although it looks horrendous, you know, there's tin cans there, next door gave me, he's an engineer, and he gave me some, that's what these pieces are, that look like big fat washers, screws, saws, some of my saws that have gone rusted, that they were blunt, so I left them outside to rust, spanners, screwdrivers. This piece here is a drill bit, and when we were having work done on the house, I used to come home from work, and this was a good few years ago, and I used to get in the skip and see what they'd put in the skip from the day's work, and that metal drill bit, basically, which is a good 6 inch in diameter, if not more, is used to drill through the masonry to bring your pipes through.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, that would be great if it was rusted. So I've made some fabulous pieces with that. And people don't believe that it's actually a rusty drill bit. Yes, this is a crankshaft. So a lot of my hand printed scarves have been made with the crankshaft as well.
Blimey.
And there's more underneath there.
Gosh. So your fabric really tells a story, doesn't it?
Well, I like the idea for the metal that it has another life. So these pieces here, they were cooling rack, you know, from when you would take something out of the oven.
Yeah.
And as you can see, that's a tiny piece now. So it started off, the work that I was able to make when it was still in one piece is very different now to the prints and the contact prints that I can get from the pieces that are left. So I like the idea that the metal has a life after the function that it was intended for, and that life continues to change as it degrades in the weather, so to speak.
Yeah, so your tools are evolving at the same time as your designs.
Yeah, it's a perfect way to put it. Yeah, definitely, they are. And I like that, because that's another element of uniqueness, if that's the word. And also that feeds into this sort of theme of, I don't know what I'm going to get, because the pieces don't always print the same way each time you use them, even if you follow the process exactly. Sometimes they can be a bit stubborn and not release their marks as they did the previous time. So I'm more at the mercy of the tools than the tools are at my mercy, if that makes sense.
There are two aspects to Tracy's art. Not only does she dye the fabrics using the various methods she described to me, she then goes on to use the fabric employing various stitch techniques, as well as making art quilts. Above her dye room is her stitching space, where the beauty and precision of Tracy's work blew me away.
This is the stitching space. So this these are made with my hand dyed. That is, so that's English paper piecing, which I'd never done before, and I'm not very good with hand stitch, so I set myself a challenge, like you do, that I would use my hand dyed cloth, and I've got a bit of a thing about hexagons at the moment. So although I love the organic shapes that now other processes give me, sometimes I like to go back to circles and squares and hexagons, etc. So this piece, I just wanted to use hexagons. I don't know why, I just had it in my head that I wanted to use hexagons, and I wanted something that I could sit watching the telly do. So I chose my colour palette, I dyed the fabrics, and then I cut out using a die, because if I was cutting all those hexagons by hand,
it'd take forever.
So I also wanted to make sure that I could introduce some level of accuracy, which isn't my strong point, into it as well. So I cut them all up and then cut the papers. I used freezer paper rather than card, because then I could iron it on and then fold the edges over. And then it took a long time, best part of last year really, to stitch them all together. So each row was stitched and then the rows were stitched together. But as you can see, it's in purples and 2 shades of blue, greens, and I tried to dye 2 different values, so you can see the purple, there's a darker purple, and then there's more with white, and the same for the what would be a royal blue and a turquoise and a limey green and an even more limey green. There's 2 values to each colour. And then I'm not very good at making decisions, I have to confess, so you would not believe how long it took me moving those, because these were all individual pieces, obviously hexagons, playing about with the placement. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's 10 rows. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So there's 15 hexagons in each row, and there's 10 rows of them. So it's not a huge piece, but it's not small either. Yeah, it took a long time to decide how to put those, the 4 different colours, and also 5 different colours, and the different colour values together. So I hope it worked.
Yeah, it's beautiful. The colours are so vibrant as well.
Yeah, hand-dyed art cloth tends to do that as well. You can play about with, with how you mix the dye and the different colours that you mix. You can get, depending on what you mix together and how you mix it, you can either have bright colours or you could subdue them a bit so they're a bit more sombre. I tend to let these ones just do their thing and see. It's more about the texture. You can see each hexagon is different, even though that bottom row is purple. Each one is different because it's got different textural elements of it.
Absolutely, yeah.
And each hexagon in the whole piece is different, so that makes it a bit busier as well. But as it stands at the moment, it's hung on my design wall, and I just come in and look at it, and I haven't managed to decide what to do with it next.
That's the joy of doing this kind of thing, though, isn't it? You can just leave it,
yes,
and then it can evolve when it's ready to.
And I find that's important for me, because I have too many ideas. My motto is not enough lifetimes, because I haven't got enough lifetime. Even if I had many lifetimes, it still wouldn't be enough for the volume of ideas that I have, which I don't seem to be able to switch off. So I do very much in the cloth that I make, and then when I use the cloth, I have to allow time for percolation or contemplation and often the pieces will, this sounds really daft, but often by just taking a step back and leaving them there, often they'll then tell me what I need to do next. Because once I've put it up and stood back from it, I'll think, oh, it's not dark enough, oh, it needs more stitch, oh, it doesn't need any stitch, or whatever the decision might be. And by taking a bit of time and distance from it, it can often make the piece better, because your decisions are then better.
Yeah, rather than rushing into making a mistake.
Yeah. I must admit, I am not quick. Everything I do, there's a time element to it. I do like my contemplation. and that in some ways is a good thing, and in some ways it's not, because sometimes you can become immobilised by the array of decisions in front of you, whereas if you've got a deadline, sometimes you think, right, I haven't got time to dally with this, I'm not dithering, I've just got to make a decision and get it, if it's for an exhibition or a challenge in a group that you're in or whatever it might be. Sometimes the deadlines can prove useful, but it's not a way that I would work all the time. I don't think my perfectionist control freak streak would cope with the deadlines for every piece that I made. I might make more pieces though, if that's the case. I'd probably be more prolific, because I'm most definitely not. And I'm always in awe of other people who they go to a course, or they'll say, oh, this is what I'm making, and the next week it's finished. I'm definitely not like that. And these here are some of the pieces of work. These are scarves. So these are printed with leaves from the garden, and I haven't got any up here at the moment, but often what I'll do, so this is a work in progress, and you can see it's just one layer of surface design at the moment, but they're all leaves that have left their mark on the cloth, and that's a whole other area of expertise. But often what I'll do is I'll start with the rust, and I'll lay the rust down on the cloth, and then respond to what I have from that layer of mark making with stuff from the garden, basically leaves, twigs, whatever it might be, and it grows that way. Scarves, hand printed and hand dyed scarves were something that organically came along because people loved the cloth and were like, oh, do you make scarves? And you know how these things happen.
Yes.
Before you know it, you're making scarves. So yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. So it's quilted. It is quilted, isn't it?
This is what basically you would describe as an art quilt. It's not designed or made to go in a bed, which everybody think. Sometimes I think that art quilt or quilts do a disservice to the textile art that's produced as a result of that sort of medium or media, if you like. Because people, if you say you make art quilts or you make quilts, they immediately think that you make things to put on a bed. And there's such a wealth of talent in the UK for people who are making textile art using quilting, and yet it doesn't get the recognition that it should do, which is a great shame. And I think our art scene in the UK are missing out on that, really. And if you compare it to the States, they have a completely different mentality when it comes to textiles. People will buy and put in their collection art quilts and textiles. There isn't the same hierarchy applied to textiles and to art, I would say, in the States, as we do have here. And I think it's a bit self-limiting, which is a shame, really.
Absolutely.
So this piece is a work in progress, and its sister piece is hung in the other room. And I've only just recently started hanging my work in my own home, which I know sounds really daft, but I was running out of space of storage. This is the quilt wardrobe, where my finished pieces hang. So that's the similar piece that you saw downstairs, the sort of fire piece that went from purples to magentas. And so this is the same dyes, but I manipulated the cloth differently. And then this is quilted, and I matched the thread where I could to the colour changes in the cloth that the Dyer produced, and it's very heavily quilted with free motion quilting. So free motion quilting is a technique where you move the cloth underneath a needle and your feed dogs are down, and you're not restricted to a linear direction, if that makes sense.
It looks very natural, almost like floral, but not.
Yes. Well, because of the sort of visual texture that the dye gives you, I tried with the stitching. You can see probably better here at the bottom. I tried to follow the organic shapes that the dye had left behind, and used that as a roadmap, really, for the stitching, the direction of the stitching. but it took a lot of thread changes, colour changes on that one.
I'm not surprised. It's absolutely stunning.
That was my lockdown challenge. A lot of my cloth, I fall in love with it, and then I can't bring myself to cut it up or stitch it or even stitch it. So I have, as you can see, a lot of cloth that I take out and I admire it and stroke it, and then I put it back. And this was one of the first pieces of cloth I ever dyed a long time ago now. And during lockdown, I've got a Facebook group with fellow quilters, and a lot of them who buy my cloth to use in their work, and I set them a challenge to use a piece of cloth, because everybody says to me, oh, I love your work but I couldn't cut it up. And I thought to myself, how can I encourage somebody else to use it if I can't bring myself to do it? So I set myself a challenge to use this piece, and it was my favourite piece, and it was one of the first ones, and I was terrified of ruining it. So that's why it must be 10 years ago when I dyed that piece.
Gosh.
And it's been admired by me on and off over that period of time. So I was quite anxious about, I could see the piece in my head, but I was quite anxious about how it was gonna turn out.
I can imagine the stakes are high though when you've become so attached to a piece of cloth, and you know that there's no way you could recreate it if something went wrong. So you've got to do it justice, haven't you?
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's it. Because I was thinking, if I muck this up, it's not like I can just go to the drawer and get another piece out the same. So I suppose that's an advantage and a disadvantage. We shall see.
Oh wow, your work's beautiful.
Thank you.
Now, I can imagine you're itching to see all of the beautiful fabrics, colours and quilt projects Tracy described to me, and I apologise if you were feeling a bit frustrated that you couldn't see what she was talking about. Well, if you take a look at the show notes for this episode on the Making Stitches website, you can see some photos of Tracy's work, and also there you can find some links to Tracy's website and her social media channels. My sincere thanks to Tracy for allowing me to take a look inside her rooms of requirement, and for talking to me about her beautiful work. And if your interest has been piqued about the upcoming Great Northern Textile Show, there are tickets available online now. It's happening on Sunday the 23rd of October at Be Active in Urmston in Greater Manchester, which is right next to Junction 9 of the M60, so it's really easy to get to. There'll be exhibitors from the worlds of yarn craft, textiles, quilting, embroidery, felting, spinning and loads more too, including local craft guilds who'll be able to help visitors discover new crafts or new techniques to add to their repertoires. I certainly can't wait to go along and see what's on offer. You can find the details for the Great Northern Textile Show in the show notes too. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of Making Stitches podcast. If you enjoyed it, please consider sharing it with anyone who you think might enjoy it too, or even leave me a review on your favourite podcast app so other people can find the podcast easier in future. That's all for this time, but I'll be back again in 2 weeks' time with some more inspiring, crafty conversation. Until next time, thanks so much for listening. Stay safe and enjoy your crafting.